All right. So what is artificial intelligence? Well, one thing I'm going to emphasize is that it is not intelligent. It is not sentient. Artificial intelligence does not distinguish between true or false, or right or wrong. It has no more intrinsic understanding of the data that it spits out than a houseplant. You're looking at a mechanical process. You are not looking at a thinking being. You are not looking at thought. You're looking at mechanics. And that is extremely important to understand. Okay? Basically, AI is a kind of sorting and averaging system. So basically, you ask it a question and it scrapes around for everything related to that question, and then it gives you a response, which is an average of all the material in that category, and it weights its averages according to the prompts that you give it. It functions as a trial and error machine, producing outputs that fit or don't fit a problem. And when the outputs don't match up, it tries a different output until eventually it gets one. And this resembles behavior, like when it figures out how to overcome a restriction, but it is not behavior. It is a mechanical process. I cannot emphasize this enough, because one of the worst things that happens in AI is that we anthropomorphize it constantly. We talk about it in terms of learning and training. We compare it to human processes. And often discussion gets muddy because it goes back and forth. And we talk sometimes in terms of comparing it or analogizing it to human process. And sometimes we discuss it as mechanical process. And if you listen to the debate about AI, what you find is that the two sides keep switching back and forth. So depending on the agenda, whether you're for it or against it, the categories or areas where it will be described in human terms and the categories where it gets described in mechanical terms are switched back and forth. My advice is to be careful of any usage of human terms of sentient processes in describing this. Always try to keep this in mind. It's mechanical. It's a machine, an abstract machine. AI operates by consuming vast quantities of data. And this is sometimes called learning or training. But it is no more learning or training than a photocopier spitting out photocopies is. Like I said, machine process. And you gotta watch out for that. That's just kind of bad thinking. Because the problem is that when people say, okay, it's learning, then they analogize it to human process. Okay, so AI learns, humans learn. So what's the difference, right? AI just sort of learns through thousands and thousands of books and manuscripts and then spits out an answer. Isn't that just like kind of how humans learn, like reading thousands of books for a lifetime and coming up with a synthesis? No, it's not. It's not the same process. We shouldn't describe it as the same process because that gets us into traps. This consumption of vast quantities of data is called scraping, and it is one of the biggest and most controversial aspects of AI currently, because that's where people are getting ripped off. But it kind of can get serious when you think about it. Like, I know that there's been a couple of lawyers who have gotten disbarred or disciplined by their law societies because they did use ChatGPT to do their legal research, and ChatGPT made up imaginary case law.
Oh dear.
That's pretty terrifying. And let me give you an example. Supposing that you asked AI to generate a list of edible mushrooms, because you're going out mushroom picking. Sorry. Well, given AI's tendency to hallucinate, getting that list of edible mushrooms from AI might kill you pretty damn quick. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong with hallucination. And the problem doesn't seem to be going away. If anything, it seems to be getting worse. The frequency or degree of hallucination seems to be escalating. Now, my own theory is that it's something like what we've experienced right there with Susan and feedback. As AI proliferates, it doesn't care whether something is true. It's just averaging out data and giving you a response. So if the average of data gives you an imaginary response, they just give you that average. They don't care. The system is not cognitive to whether something is true or not. The system is just cognitive or basically scoping out an average answer based on the scraping that it does. And I think that's where hallucination comes from. But like I said, here's the thing. As AI systems proliferate, the scraping that they're doing is basically other AI systems. So you're getting feedback loops. And so it gets, wonky, and suddenly you've got those bizarre tones. The other problem with AI is that because of its scraping and averaging, it basically reproduces bias. Now, let me give you an example here. Supposing that you are looking to AI for medical advice, and AI goes out and it scrapes all the medical literature on this point. Now, just supposing that most of the literature, say before 1950, used a lot of leeches. And then, say, about 10 years ago, somebody discovered the leeches used for this is actually quite dangerous. So the state of the art is not to use leeches. Your AI system just averages out. And so they get an average of, okay, there's 99% recommendations for leeches, and there's 1% recommendations that leeches will actually kill you. And so it will instruct you to use leeches because that's the average. And there are actually many real life examples of this, because what we find, or what we found, is when AI was used for sorting, for human resources, for employment interviews, it turned out to be pretty damn sexist and racist. AI systems were actively and aggressively discriminating against women and against Black people and other minorities in hiring decisions, in workplace evaluation decisions. Why? Well, because it was only averaging, and the data that it was scraping contained decades and decades of institutional bias, and so it just reproduced that. This is a problem with the system. There's no judgment going on in AI. It's just an averaging machine, okay? It's a mechanical process, which means that you're getting into some problems. Before we jump right into the main thing, I'm going to acknowledge that right now AI is pretty crap. And, you bring it up with writers, and a lot of writers will just put their heads in the sand and they'll say, well, sure, AI can write a story or write a novel or write a textbook or write a magazine, but there's that human spirit, that human feeling, that human touch that is irreproducible, and that, it's really the spark of life that will make it different, and it can never really match that. Bullshit. We have technology that exists today, publicly available, and I'm going to say that technology is not stable. It is advancing rapidly. And it is likely that there is more advanced technology existing today that is not publicly available. It is likely that this technology is going to continue to rapidly evolve into the future past current limits. And I think that within a period of 5 or 10 years, we're looking at extreme evolution. None of this is standing still. That is the thing that I want to emphasize. AI systems right now are not standing still. Whatever you've built with ChatGPT, in 6 months' time, in a year's time, in 2 years' time, they will have built more advanced versions. They will have built more sophisticated programs and programming. So you cannot just assume that oh, well, the machine will never be able to write a poem with real spirit in it. Yeah. Why don't you just go down and, lay down on some railroad tracks and see if locomotives are more scared of you than you are of it. All right. And this kind of leads me to my issue or the challenge that I think we face as artists and as writers confronted with AI. Now, I'm going to go back and maybe use historical examples. A few hundred years ago, there was a wool industry in Scotland, and there were, crafters and crofters, and there was like a whole society, a whole network of seamstresses and wool spinners, etc. And there were communities, villages, like it was an industry that a lot of people relied on. And then along came the spinning jenny and, the mechanical looms. And all those women who were basically, weaving wool, suddenly they were out of business. And the early machines were pretty crap, and it produced a much inferior brand of woven wool. But the problem was that there were economies of scale. These machines could produce far more, like 100 times more than the women weaving. And even if it produced something that was only 50% as good, the fact that it produced 100 times more meant that the people selling wool goods could get wool from the machine for pennies, and they were paying pounds for like the really good stuff. And they were just driven out of the market. And this happens over and over in any craft or any trade, any historical example that you want to see. If mechanical production comes in and mechanical production is able to outproduce the human by orders of magnitude, then economics comes into play. It's producing so much more for so much less, for pennies instead of dollars. And even if the product is inferior, you're boned. They'll shut you out of the market. This is the consistent economics of volume. AI can produce overwhelmingly more, overwhelmingly faster, and overwhelmingly cheaper. Craftsmanship is simply not competitive. And especially, it's not competitive at prices that AI will offer. I mean, right now people are selling novels, like selling these things for like $15 or $20 a piece. AI could basically chug those things out for $5 a piece. You look at most professional writers, they have to make a living. They have to sell, 4 or 5 books. If an average fiction writer, if they're selling 2 books a year, they're not making good money, but they're making a living. Well, to sell 2 books a year, you've got to have a certain volume of sales. The books have to be sold at a certain price for them to sustain the royalty. If you have AI can chug out 100 books, and AI can price each of those books at 1/10 the cost. And suddenly the independent writer who's doing his 2 books a year has 100 other competitors. All of his competitors are selling at, say, 10% of his cost. And he's either going to have to face the fact that he's probably not going to sell a book in a marketplace of 100 other people where he's charging 10 times as much, or he's going to have to drop his price, excuse my gendered language, to the same level of the AI books. So he or she will now be selling for 1/10 of the original cost, which means that the revenue will be 1/10 of what it used to be, except, of course, that they've got 100 other competitors, so the revenue is now maybe 1% of what it used to be. If you can make a living at that, good luck to you. Now, getting back to AI, I want to talk about the legal issues. Just, being a lawyer and all that, it's kind of where I default to. The good news so far is that AI work cannot be copywritten, not under the current state of the law. And that was true last year, that's still true this year. There is, as yet, no court decision, one way or the other. The foundation of the position that AI cannot sustain copyright is an opinion issued by the U.S. Copyright Registry, so it's official policy. What this means is that at this point, any AI story, any AI novel or book or artwork is intrinsically public domain. Somebody can generate an AI thing and anybody can take it and do whatever they want with it. The consequences of that have not fully worked themselves out, but one of the things that's come up, of course, is that we are seeing a lot of AI-based piracy. The sort of people who don't give a shit about copyright in the first place are basically using this to commit piracy. And even if their product, even if the pirated product goes out into the marketplace and it doesn't really make that much money, the economics favor them. And the example that you gave earlier, this parallel book that was basically entirely plagiarized. They could price that book for 99 cents. Your friend is pricing her book for, $4.99 or $6.99 as an ebook. Well, if they priced it 99 cents and the books are relatively comparable, they're taking at least half the market, probably more than half the market. So it has been kind of a boom for piracy. There is some uncertainty in the international situation. If you end up talking to people online or on social media or some places with respect to artificial intelligence product, there is a lot of misinformation going on in terms of copyright. But so far, the consensus law is that AI is not sustaining copyright because it is not a human process. Now, there are actually, since this has come out, there's been a number of lawsuits that are being brought against AI providers. Most of these lawsuits deal with copyright scraping. So it's likely that sooner or later, directly or indirectly, courts are going to be asked to make a decision on whether AI can sustain copyright. And frankly, one of the things that we have to look at is not just the courts, but the people who write the law. Now, currently, even if AI cannot sustain copyright, all they have to do is change the law, and then it becomes legal and liable. And the process of writing that law or rewriting that law, of making those decisions, can be a little bit opaque. It is not an interruptible process. Disney consistently bullied Congress into extending its copyright protections. Mickey Mouse should have been in public domain back in 1965. Mickey Mouse is only entering public domain. Parts of Mickey Mouse will be entering public domain this year or next.
It's this year. It's already January 1st.
Okay, January 1st. But this is the thing, they managed to legislate themselves or, bribe themselves 95 years of copyright extension. Well, the original American Copyright Act only provided for 28 years with like a renewal for 12. So Mickey should have been in public domain within 40 years. That's kind of an issue. Now, let's talk about ownership of copyright and artificial intelligence. And there are several issues regarding ownership. First, ownership of inputs, and this comes to data scraping. It's absolutely, completely the Wild West out there right now. AI is being, and I'm going to use the sloppy human technical term, trained up on everything fed into it, and everything is being fed into it. It engages in data crawling or net sifting or scraping, however you want to call it, either automatically or as part of the algorithm or deliberately, and in terms of things chosen by programmers to be fed into it. And much of this material, almost all of it, is under copyright and it is owned. And none of this is being used with express consent or authorization. And I'm going to be very blunt. This is an absolutely and completely unethical use of other people's work, use without their express consent, without implied consent, and use for purposes beyond contemplation. Okay? I mean, there's no equivocation here. Outright theft. The excuse that is being given, and the excuse that you will hear from AI advocates, is that, well, it's just learning. It's not copying, it's learning. It is just doing the same process that humans do. We learn, we read books and we learn from them. And then we, integrate them and we become intelligent sometimes and we say things that are not completely foolish. No, that is not what AI is doing. That is not the process that AI goes through. It just scrapes and averages. It's a machine process. It is not learning. It is not training. It's just taking. AI crawlers have dealt with this ethical and legal issue by mostly ignoring it. And most AI advocates, if confronted with this issue, they will lie through their fucking teeth. And I say this in the bluntest possible way. And if this is done in front of you, you should grab the nearest heavy object and fling it at their head. So, and so we have the Sarah Silverman lawsuit, the New York Times lawsuit. There are class action lawsuits starting up by thousands of writers challenging the use of their work to train up AI. And that's probably going to go on. And so far, the defenses are deeply disingenuous. And there are also deeply dishonest things that are being done. We've caught both Zoom and Spotify changing their contracts to say, oh yeah, we reserve the right to use anything that you upload to us for the purpose of training or AI. So now it's in the contract, so it's all nice and legal, right? You've heard that? You've seen people make that kind of argument. So we are living in an era of ghost contracts where things like this are being snuck in. And I think there are deep, deep ethical issues with that. And there has been pushback. When Spotify tried it, it blew up in their face. There was a big blowback. And they had to say, well, this is all a misunderstanding, and we didn't really want to take everything you ever put up and steal it for AI. And the same with Zoom. They said, well, it's a misunderstanding. But Jesus Christ, if this had snuck through with them, anything you ever did on Zoom would be available for AI training, which would mean your voice, your face, every expression or inflection, everything you ever said, every discussion you ever had, every piece of information you ever volunteered. If this isn't inspiring a sense of creeping dread and terror in you, there is something wrong. They're giving you the wrong meds. Go off of them. So this is a problem. And I want to emphasize, just in terms of the legal issue, what is copyright? Copyright is the right to make a copy of something. Fundamentally, this is what AI is doing when it scrapes. It makes a copy that it can then average. All right. What AI is doing is no different than sticking a sheet of paper in a photocopier and making a reproduction that way. It is a copying process. It is not a learning process. And I have to emphasize that. It's an open-ended field right now. People are beginning to push back really hard. A number of persons, agencies, organizations, collectives, class action suits. There's public outcry pushing back over all of this. And it's wide open. And this discussion, this debate is still going to go on because there's a lot of money to be made in AI, which means that there's a lot of money to be made in stealing your data, the copy. There is a lot more money if they don't have to get your permission, if they don't have to pay for it. So you will see among advocates of AI a lot of misinformation. Regarding confidentiality and privacy, there's a lot out there. There are different rules for different expectations. It's literally Wild West, but it is not a surrender. Now, the problem is that none of this is actually policed. So if your Facebook stuff does actually get uploaded to a porn site, what do you do? Well, you can call the cops, but they won't give a shit. You can hire a lawyer, but if you're trying to sue some, farm server that's in Czechoslovakia or I guess Bulgaria, and they're just relaying from like Lithuania, good luck. These pirates will tend to avoid the big players like Disney. They will tend to negotiate with the big players, big name writers, people who have some authority, people who have some resources, but the little people like us are often vulnerable and preyed upon. And there's just not a lot yet to go.
When you say user contract, is that the same as end user license agreements?
Yes. Anyway, people or companies like Zoom or Spotify have been trying to fix their little problems through retroactive contracts, or there's a move to write legislation to pass these laws really quickly before anybody can take a look at it and nail people to the wall. The effort to create these contracts, the effort to insert these provisions in contracts or to try and get legislation going suggests to me that it is an admission by the AI advocates that they don't have faith in their position. If your position is that, oh no, everything's legal, we can just data scrape to our heart's content, and really, it's not a problem, it's not a big deal. And at the same time, they're going, yeah, let's get some contract provisions in here to give us permission to do this. They know they're pirating you. They understand they're pirating you. Now, let's move on. There's another issue in terms of ownership of the software, the processing system. Is the author of an AI work? Who is the author of an AI work generated by human prompts? Is it the human who supplied the prompts? Is it the AI software that generated the work? And if it is the software, then does that mean that the real owner of any artistic work is actually the owner of the AI software? This is a real issue because it comes down to the ownership of artistic productivity. We may be seeing a situation where the vast sum or total of human artistic productivity may be about to be captured by the owners of AI software. Again, this should instill a sense of caution terror in you. If the AI software user is the owner or the holder of any rights in an AI product, on what basis? Are they licensed? What does the license look like? Does license determine ownership? What about royalties, spinoffs? All of the issues regarding AI-generated product are basically open-ended and Wild West. There are no answers right now. We're barely starting to ask the questions. And yet, we are all rushing headlong into this. And again, it comes back to my next issue. What is the copyright status of AI writing or art? Who owns an AI copyright, especially if it's based on scanning prior works? And here things kind of get really, really complicated. Because, you know, the advocates of AI says, well, you know, it's a new thing. So if I have a short story written in the style of Stephen King, or if I have an artwork generated in the style of Erte, that's mine. That doesn't belong to Erte or Stephen King. I'm not infringing on Stephen King as long as it's a somewhat original work. And here the case law gets to be a little bit messy. It's not good. If style theft is not actionable, then AI trolls can hijack every single writer and artist, any famous one, anybody who's even niche, who shows any kind of promise or potential. I just sort of, you know, randomly rip them off, even if they're not famous or successful or niche, just on the off chance. It's literally death of the artist. I mean, if style theft is not actionable, then what is? I've looked at that. I think some things, like, I think the law needs to really take a hard run at this, and I think the Fogarty case may have to be amended or revised, or we're all done for.